one of the things that Brian McLaren said in Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation today was exactly what I have felt. He said the struggle is to have a faith that isn't an evacuation plan or an escape into private bliss, but a way of seeking to have a spiritual transformation in our own lives that will express itself in change and transformation in our world. I felt like our denomination became this place that was always preparing for evacuation of the planet instead of how do I live as a transformative agent in this place that I have been born into, and I only have a few years, but how do I become this place of transformation in my own heart and also in this community where I live?
Hey Dropouts, this is Brandon.
Hey, and this is Chelsea.
We are here with our friends Ken and Teresa Garner.
Woo!
Hey!
We are so glad you guys are joining us. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing okay. Yeah. We've got coffee and a
You're
roof
like-
over our head. So
We are grateful.
We're about to do a podcast interview, so we're okay until you.
Perfect.
we're
You're thrilled?
we're hoping we're okay in 30 minutes. Yeah. So
Well, I want to tell our audience a little bit about you guys. Ken and Teresa met in college. They were in ministry together from college on through their adult lives, while their three kids taught them how to be parents. That's a great way to put it. That's funny. They spent over 30 years in church ministry, loving teens and their family. Teresa was a professor of youth ministry and practical theology, and Ken became a lead pastor toward the end of their church ministry. They spent a lot of time together searching for the perfect cup of coffee in Columbus, Ohio. They're reconstructing their lives and finding the greatest joy in loving their family, learning to love instead of fear, and being surprised by oasis encounters where two or three are gathered. That's Ken and Teresa Garner. We're so happy you guys are here.
Thank you so much for having us, you all. This is a privilege. Normally we're doing podcasts as well, but it's been a while, and so I feel a little like, okay, here we go.
yeah, it's just how our people feel. So.
Yep. We Brandon went to the university that Teresa was a professor at. So that was kind of like where their paths crossed. And I did not go to any kind of, Christian or Nazarene type of formal education besides what they were required for licensing and stuff. But I did go to some really big events at the college that Teresa was a professor at. And so I had the privilege of sitting under some of her breakout sessions and teaching in some of those ways. And I remember the first time I ever sat into a lesson, basically, that she was kind of teaching at an event. Well, I guess I won't say the name because then they'll know where it was, but it was a big ministry event. And it was just, I remember walking away thinking that's the best. That's what I want to do. I remember thinking I want to be a youth ministry professor someday because she was so fun and so smart and so relatable. But I walked away with so much. And so I stayed in contact. I kind of was a little stalkery, kind of found her on social media, told her how much I loved it, and just kind of became her friend, really, which wasn't really her choice, but, and here we are. And so she's spoken at events for, the district that Brandon and I were pastors on. She's been a speaker, for some of our stuff there. And of course, Kenneth, her husband, he's been in ministry, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit with them. But the reason that they're on the podcast today is not because Teresa is still doing what she was doing, and it's not because Ken is still in full-time ministry, and that's kind of where we want to meet them. And so we would love to start the conversation by just knowing the question that we kind of ask everybody in the beginning, which is like, you're a dropout for a reason. There was somewhere along the way
Yes.
of saying yes to all of the things that the denomination asked of you, and all of the sudden something got hairy, right? Something got weird. And so we kind of just want to know a little bit about your story from where it started being a little bit shaky, and not knowing kind of where you guys were at, and how that happened.
I'll start by just saying, the way that I succinctly put it was, I was born into a church that loved me. I left a church that feared me.
Hmm.
I believe that all along I asked questions. From early on, I asked questions because I remember asking certain questions and my dad saying, "Don't question, babe, don't question." And I thought, but I already am. And I
Yeah.
needed a place that was safe enough to ask questions. Um, I I didn't know that the church that I was a part of, the institution, I'm going to say it that way, that I was a part of, was going to go down a road that turned from a more loving acceptance and a curiosity and a maybe an environmentally friendly place,
Yeah,
to a
literally.
place that didn't want me to ask questions, didn't want me to rock the boat, didn't want me to search,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and couldn't really handle that. And I think when I left, I felt there was so much fear that they silenced me. So they asked me basically to leave, and then said because I turned in my ordination credentials that I was acting with integrity. That blew my mind. I thought all
Hmm.
along asking the questions and searching and trying to understand the heart of God through the life of Jesus,
Mhm.
I thought that was integrity.
Yeah.
But then when, I think I was asked to leave because of, and Ken won't go into more detail, I think, but it was some of these polarizing situations we found ourselves in from 2016 to till now.
Yeah. Yeah.
People could handle much more conservative stances. They could not handle stances that were less conservative or more centrist or even farther than that. They could not. We couldn't even have conversations. We still are struggling to have conversations, and that's
Yeah.
Hmm.
heartbreaking to me. So, Ken, what about you?
Well, very quickly after everything happened, really, from the end of summer 2020 to January, March of 21, for the both of
Mhm.
us, we really were telling people that we didn't leave the Church of the Nazarene. We feel like
Mhm.
it left us,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
because in all of our growing up and all of our religious education and in our training and everything, the way that Nazarenes read scripture and that we were ordained because we believed in that Wesleyan quadrilateral and the way they did scripture
Yeah.
and all that. And those played a big part in walking away. Um, uh, but we really feel like the Church of the Nazarene turned its back on the Wesleyan quadrilateral, that the Church of the Nazarene turned its back on its view of Scripture. And,
Yep.
and ultimately, at one point, we were always on a little bit feeling on the outside, and then we just served in a great place in Jackson, Michigan for a long time. And they did some incredible things there. And so we just kind of felt like we were in a great place there, in a great community. And But as we moved from there to another place, we just kind of felt like the Church of the Nazarene and that we were part of had kind of turned its back on the poor, had turned its back on the races that were marginalized and on racism.
Yep.
And we felt like the Church of the Nazarene not only turned its back on the LGBTQ community, but that the Church of the Nazarene was targeting anybody who was going to love queer people.
And I want to interrupt you for a second because, of course, that's a hot one,
Yeah.
right? The racism, the LGBTQ. You just hit a lot of, and I want to just ask though. You and Teresa are two straight white individuals, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a reason that the LGBTQ community and racism mattered to you. And it's not just because you are centered with Jesus. That's one of the reasons. But what was happening in your personal, like what was going on to where
Right.
you said something is not right here?
Yeah. So we were always brought up. I've been like deconstructing and reconstructing those wonderful words my whole life, and that's just kind of how it was in my with my mom and my dad, and then in college, I remember going through that during my training and almost walking away and then not, and that was just an ongoing study it and find the truth and follow the truth. And so we were always just kind of in this spiral, not down, but spiral up, because one of the things that hurt the most is when people would say, well, you guys have changed. Well, it's like, oh, that's bad. I thought we were supposed to.
Yeah, right.
I thought we were supposed to become more like Christ, become more like we were created to be, uncover the image of God in us. And so, and so Teresa was ahead of me a little bit on some of this.
My doctoral program, there was so much. And I had this class with Christina Cleveland from Duke at the time, an African-American woman who is just remarkable. And she teamed up with Shane Claiborne, and they taught this class. And it was just about radical reconciliation. It was about understanding racism in the church and power structures in the church. It really opened my eyes. And there were a lot of people using the woke word in our classes. And I didn't even understand that word at the time, when I was going through my doctoral process. But as I'm listening to it, my heart is breaking more and more and more and thinking, wait a minute, I am the oppressor. I am the one that is guilty here. I thought I was welcoming and loving, but there were so many things I didn't know, and some of my ignorance was really impacting some of the things I was teaching, some of the things I was believing. And so I think we both just felt that there was so much more growing to do. We started reading. Now, I will say way back I was young. I was very young when my first gay friend, when I was very young. I'm 60 years old, so I was very young when I stop acting surprised. I was 6.
She's the only one on this podcast in her 60s. So.
Okay, well, anyway. So,
well, you look like you're 35, so knock it off. Knock it off.
The one who looks it. So, yeah.
So I think for me, this process of, and I was at a school, at a doctoral school that was not affirming, but the studies, the reading, the people that were teaching, the people that were listening, the stuff I was digesting was just hitting me left and right. And I could no longer act like I could continue in this place, being an authentic Jesus follower. And I was seeing the marginalized right in front of my face. And yes, you were also talking about what happened personally. Yeah, we had friends and family coming out to us openly, whether it was in the church foyer or in our home. And they were trusting us in my office. They were trusting us with,
and you couldn't accepting of that.
in fact, that's why I lost my position. I was asked to not return because I was affirming of LGBTQ people and their relationships, and I believed they loved God, and I believed God loved them, and I still do. And I realized they had no recourse. And Ken had said several times, we've got to stand up for these people. We have been privileged to walk where we have walked and experience the things we have experienced, but these people need us to be in solidarity with them. And we just started, and the stuff we started reading and then talking about, but Ken is the one who said, let's just start. It was during COVID. Let's just have them over. Everybody can come over and we'll get around a fire pit, and we're going to wear masks if we need to around a fire pit. And we're just going to share our stories. And that changed every part of us.
If I back up, as far as being prejudiced, I mean, I still consider myself in recovery for that.
Me too.
And I remember my freshman year of college sitting next to a friend of mine who was a black man, and we were studying, and it was like, I looked over at him, and, I'm embarrassed by this now, but it was a moment, and I'm like, you're normal. I mean, how offensive can you be, right? And he just looked back at me. He didn't hit me. He didn't. He was still my friend. And he goes, "And you're prejudiced." And I'm like, I know. I don't know what to do about that. Because I was brought up in a community where we took all of our people of color, and they lived in a little corner, and it was just the community just kind of taught me to be that way, and so I've been in recovery and trying to not be, trying to look at people differently ever since. And when I look at history with African Americans, with indigenous people of this country, there was something about all of it that just didn't sit right. And I have a family member, an extended family member, who is a gay man, and he loves God, and he said to me and my dad when we were eating lunch with him one time, he goes, "I know I'm doomed, Kenny. I've read the Bible front and back many times, and I know I'm doomed, but this is who I am, and if God can't love me like I am, then I'm just doomed." And there's something not clicking. There's something not right there. And so I'm still looking at this quadrilateral thing, and
could you explain what that is,
Ken? Yeah, probably
for anybody in our audience that.
Sure.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. The Wesleyan quadrilateral, and John Wesley didn't actually coin the phrase. It's a later follower of John Wesley that kind of put these four things together and called it the Wesleyan quadrilateral. But that the will of God, the truth of God, can be discerned from four things. And now, some people will say one is greater than the other, but they all work together. And that would be Scripture, tradition, the tradition of the church, reason, our thinking and everything, and then experience. And those four things together all help us discern the will of God and the truth of God. And so as young people were coming out to us, it was like, okay.
All of a sudden, it was all of a
the
sudden.
foyer of the church. I'm like, would you like to go to my office and talk about this? I mean, does your family? But but what we learned, and then when we brought them all, when we were doing just kind of an anonymous group with them, my mind was every stereotype,
Yes.
every prejudice I had about queer people was totally changed.
Yes.
Humiliating and humbling all at the same time. But I realized, number one, that every one of these people knew themselves probably better than I did as a 50-year-old man, because they had spent their entire adolescence trying to figure out who they were in secret, and they knew who they were and they could not get away from it. And then they weren't cowards. They weren't just going with the trend, but they were willing to say, this is who I am. I am a bisexual woman. I am a gay man. I am a transgender woman. They were willing to say that and say, I can't hide anymore. I have to be me. Take me or leave me, but I'm going to be who I am. It's like that courage is not something until then that I had ever really experienced and lived personally. And so I had this, what about hell? And what about the Wesleyan quadrilateral that I'd been trained in, that still in my mind? And what about the Bible?
And you're a full-time pastor still at this point.
Yes. Yeah. And I have
Teresa, and you're still at the university, right?
And we're both
when this group,
ordained.
Yeah.
Ordained in the
And we knew that it probably would be one of the things that would cause us to walk away from that denomination at some point. And so,
because as a topic, you're playing with fire in a way that it'll burn your house down if people knew, like, or things like that.
But you know what?
And I don't mean that as in it's wrong, like fire. It's
right. But Brandon, what you said is true, because what we were seeing was we could talk about it on the floor of an assembly. We had these things out in the open talking about it, but the second you come down on one side that they don't want you on, then you're dangerous. Then you need to be silent. Yeah. And that's when we had to make a decision. And then some of these things were coming even through, like, some of the new statements they came up with. So the LGBTQ community, and we just could not stomach it.
So that
at assemblies you had to be like, so hypothetically, and asking for a friend, if I would
well, or you just wouldn't say anything.
Yeah.
And so here I am seeing all of these young pastors in the Church of the Nazarene that are affirming, and all of these students coming through college and through their religious training, and they are okay. Number one, they're not racist, and they are not like hoard all the money to themselves people, and they're not against queer people, but they accept and love them as they are. But they can't say anything. And the denomination is on a current witch hunt for anybody who is in that camp. And if they find them, they go after them. And they were not able to get rid of anybody. They were pressuring people, like integrity was the thing they used. They were pressuring people. But the general superintendents, prior to in 2020 and 2021, they came up with their own statement on human sexuality. And it was never voted on in the floor of the General Assembly by the people. And then to be part of the manual, it is then supposed to go to all the district assemblies and be approved. It was never any of that. And so then you had a group of district superintendents who answered to no one in that denomination, who were walking around and saying, "Look, we've got this. We're coming after you." But it was never voted on.
I want to say, Ken, really quick too, not to interrupt what you're saying, but I have to say, when you talk about a witch hunt, I know that there are people that listen to this, that will listen to this, that are district superintendents. Like, I know that this will be in the hands of people who you wouldn't expect, but they like to hear what we've got going on. They like the tea, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I want to clarify witch hunt for them, not really for you guys or for our regular listeners, but for the Nazarenes that still call us evil and still email us and still, all these things. For you guys, what witch hunt really means is, for years and years and years, we would have these interviews, right? Like, we would interview every year for our licenses. Now, when you're ordained, it's not as frequent, right? You really kind of have more free reign sometimes. But with district licensees like myself and Brandon, we have to go every year in front of a board, and we have to make sure that they know.
We were part of those.
What did you say, Teresa?
We were part of those boards. We were asking questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so these boards, all of the sudden, I had, I think, 8 district licenses, and all 7 of my district licenses, never in any of my interviews ever. And I remember being so scared because I knew my sexuality. I was very afraid. I was very closeted. And I was so afraid the last few years that I was going to get asked that question. How do you feel about the LGBTQ community? What do we say about it?
Sure.
And I never had anything to worry about. Never, ever, ever once. And then all of the sudden, in 2021 and 2022, all of the sudden we start getting these questions, or in the ministry conferences that we have with new candidates, they have like scenarios they'll give you or whatever. All of a sudden, the languaging in those scenarios that they gave new candidates and the questions they asked in these interviews, all of the sudden we're hyper fixated on this question.
Yes.
What does the Nazarene Church say about the LGBTQ community, and how do you feel about it?
Yes.
When we had never once been asked these questions, ever.
No, that was exactly it. And then as they were trying to pressure people out, people were going, wait a minute, I'm not doing anything against the doctrine of our denomination. This is a separate amendment statement. It's not an article of faith. And they realized that they couldn't force people out. So then the general superintendents did the same thing before last summer's General Assembly, and they made another statement, and they equated everything in the manual with an article of faith. And so what that denomination believes about anything, any social stance, which they've changed millions of times in their history, is now equal to what they believe about the Trinity, and or about Scripture, any of those things. And so now they can go after whomever they want. And so according to Tom Ord, in the research that he has done with Pew and those people, you've got 40% of that denomination that's in hiding or running because they know they're coming after him. And and it's a power grab. And that is one of the things that led us to turning in our credentials, because we just kind of felt like the denomination was being run top down, and the district superintendents are running around on their own. They answer to nobody, and no matter what they tell you, they know they don't. And so the general superintendents can't do anything to them. And so it was like we were no longer comfortable with the power in the Church of the Nazarene either. It was out of, so that was another issue for us. It's like, you know what, this isn't the same place that we grew up.
And Ken brought up the Ords, and I just want to show you guys. This is when the guy that he brought up, Thomas Ord, this book right here is, it's Why the Church of the Nazarene Should Be Fully LGBTQ Affirming. And this is a book of several. I mean, if you don't have your hands on it, you can get it on Amazon. But I mean, there are several essays in here. And these essays are not just personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
These are like psychologists, like people with multiple master's degrees in psychology and counseling. This is not, and there are personal stories too. But I do want to share this like resource with you if you are if you have left the church, or if you are struggling with what to do next, or this is a great piece of literature to get your hands on.
And Ken has an essay in that.
Yep.
And
yep.
I was supposed to, and I backed out at the last minute because
Well, Teresa, I want to ask you kind of, I know that we have to be, I don't want to say careful, but I don't want you to feel like you have to share too many details, but like, you were a very beloved professor. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've ever mentioned your name in a group of people, and I've ever heard one thing except for how loving and graceful and just, I mean, Brandon, I know you're nodding because we've talked about her in several circles of our.
Yep.
But you left, or were kind of asked to not continue, and I want to know, like, what was it that you did?
Well, I will say this. We've just been talking about this because I have not necessarily processed all of my stuff. I think I've been processing the church hurt more than anything, and processing the credentials being turned in after years of working on that, right? I think, so I know, I remember the day. I remember where we were. We were in the middle of COVID without vaccinations. I had just had COVID. I was very sick. And I had come out of that. On day 15, I had to start a class for an intensive class for graduate students. And I'm going to try to be careful and quick. Basically, I gave my position on being affirming. I did say that it was not the stance of the university, but it was my stance that I didn't feel like, I felt like I was affirming that I could affirm a same-sex union, that I had really worked through so much. In my doctoral program, it was the Wesleyan quadrilateral added to a bunch of other stuff that we would work through for a practical theology model. So we would start with what is it that we're looking at? What does science say? What does psychology say? What does we can find truth in many different places, because we believe God has given us truth through many different sources. And then the last question was always, where is Christ at work? And how will you join Christ in this work? And I could no longer, right after I said in that classroom what I said, I was still delirious with being sick. I had been very sick, and honestly, the brain fog probably got to me. However, Ken and I talked about it. With our son coming out to us, with our youngest later then telling us about being non-binary, with so many people we loved, I knew that because of what had just happened with Ken in the summer of 2020, this was the January of 2021, and immediately I was just asked not to return. And I struggled. I am struggling still. We have not found our footing as far as, I have not found my footing. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. I will start therapy again this month, hopefully, trying to figure out what I do with all that I know and all that I have become, how do I walk forward in this world? The trauma over the last 3 years has just been astounding. Losing our income, losing our home, losing our church family, losing our friends. However, I will say what Ken said in our intro, Brandon, that you read about finding these groups of 2 or 3 that are gathered together. They have been life-saving people to us. We have found our people in the wilderness, and these people know and love God and know and love us. They see us. They have walked with us. And I don't know what's next. I have applied to so many places, but when they see where my degrees are from, they want nothing to do because they're progressive schools, progressive theology schools. And so my degrees are not from progressive schools. So
it's like you have to put disclaimer in your cover letter now.
I do. My last interview, I had to say, look, I know what you're thinking. And they're nodding like, you're right. That's what we're thinking. Like, how in the world could you come here? Because we're a progressive school theologically. But I will say just a couple more things that I wanted to say. One of the things that Brian McLaren said in Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation today was exactly what I have felt. It's perfect. He said the struggle is to have a faith that isn't an evacuation plan or an escape into private bliss, but a way of seeking to have a spiritual transformation in our own lives that will express itself in change and transformation in our world. I felt like our church became this place, our denomination became this place that was always preparing for evacuation of the planet. Instead of how do I live as a transformative agent in this place that I have been born into, and I only have a few years, but how do I become this place of transformation in my own heart and also in this community where I live? And
100%.
I think we're asking the wrong questions. I think we're saying the wrong things. We're trying to keep people out instead of bring them in. I just don't understand that. That doesn't make sense to me. And so I think those are the things that
we both we're in the Church of the Nazarene because they took our parents in when they should have been on the outside.
Yes.
And both of us amazingly come from the similar situation, but the church, while both of our families were embarrassed and wanted to get rid of our moms and dads, the Church of the Nazarene in different places took our parents in and changed our family tree. And now we feel like that wasn't the denomination we were part of. And, one of the things that got me into more trouble in the pulpit than anything else was saying Jesus wasn't concerned about whether people were going to spend eternity in heaven or hell. He was concerned about the hell that they were living in right now because he came to bring heaven to them. And
God, amen. God.
That's wild that get you in trouble though.
Right. Because because then the us and them is all gone.
Yeah.
And that's important to them.
Ken, the reason too that I think that really gets you in trouble is because they knew that there were clues that you were accepting of gay people.
Oh, yeah,
that's the thing that I don't think people understand when we have this conversation.
Right.
We're not talking about the Nazarene Church needing to ordain gay people. I am. Absolutely I am. But the conversation really is just the Nazarene Church won't even welcome gay people. My God, if you say you're welcome from the pulpit about gay people, you'll lose your ordination faster than I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how fundamentalist you are.
That's
But the second you start stepping into gay territory,
Again,
you're out.
they left
Yep.
they left us and became fundamentalist. Yep.
And I will say, I think all along, because of our pastor and boss for over 20 years, who was much more progressive in his theology and really made us ask questions over and over again all the way through, Ken had started that questioning process much earlier than I in college. I had started questioning other things, but as we kept moving forward, we had to keep moving toward freedom. We had to keep moving toward this, instead of, I always say we move from this constant conversation of original sin to original blessing. Do we ever think about that? Like, God looked at us and said, "You are very good." Like, no, we had to pretend like we were all so bad and our bodies were bad and everything about us was bad. But last time I checked, God became one of us. Like, last time I checked, the incarnation was that God became a person. Well,
just don't think about it. Just read the scriptures. Just stop, Teresa. You're thinking about it too much.
It's black and white.
That's exactly. I had to say, okay. And we have so many friends and loved ones that are in the Church of the Nazarene, and family that are in the Church of the Nazarene, and we love them. And we are really trying to learn to have conversations. I think that's where it all went south. Back in 2016, we stopped having conversations with people that we don't agree with. And we've got to keep having conversations. We can't just not talk. And you asked a question. You asked the question about, what about after you left? How has the communication been after you left? And what has been so very sad is we just wanted to have conversations with the leadership that asked Ken to leave.
And it sounded like this.
Weird.
Crickets.
Weird.
No one would
I think your mic's muted. I can't hear you.
So, but that, I mean.
But no one reached out?
No. So.
Well, let's put it this way. Let the people that became our people in the wilderness, they reached out. But the leadership that was asked to be quiet and never talk to Ken and us about our stances on it, they never talked to us about our stances.
Yeah, when you go through hell, you're out in the wilderness, you find out who your people are. And we have found out who our people are.
For sure.
When we were wandering, and I mean, we lost every connection we had from birth. And we were untethered. The only thing we had, we were tethered to each other, and floating around in the wilderness out there, the body of Christ would find us and be an oasis for us and get us to the next oasis. And, we reached out, and I talked to one district superintendent and he said, you need to tell your story. And if it moves the needle, great. But if it doesn't, it's probably maybe healthier for your family to move on. And I initially had, right afterwards, I had 2 district superintendents call me to ask me the pastor. One was at a church that is fundamentalist Nazarene. They don't believe in women in ministry, things like that. My wife's an elder in the Church of Nazarene.
Why would they even
you're
ask?
Nazarene. How are you allowed to exist? But we can let people's names
right.
like that, but not.
We know a few like that.
So, but after that, nobody from leadership, I contacted us, and they knew, because when Teresa went through what she went through, and I tried to contact the Board of General Superintendents, I emailed, I wrote, I called, and never got an answer. I spoke to their administrative assistant, and they would not let me through. And
this is after 55 and 57 years in the institution.
And the thing that hurt the most,
unreal.
The thing that hurt the most is not one of them, not the DS who led the review and did things the way that he did, who lied to me several times in that review. Nobody asked me about my family. Nobody cared about my kids, my grandkids, my mom or my dad. Nobody asked us about our family. I'm like, they don't care. They just don't care. And they just wanted us to go away. And so it was like, I mean, that was difficult. Trusting the institution will be a lifelong process. I've come to, I've come to believe that Jesus didn't really come to institute a church, to make an institution. When he said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, and I believe everybody's created in the image of God. The doctrine of original sin is something that wasn't necessarily practiced or believed in for centuries after the time of Christ. And where I believe everybody's created in the image of God. And we're 2 or 3. So every person I run into is the opportunity for 2 or 3 to be gathered.
Yes.
And I have found that to be true the last 3.5 years. And I'm changing a little bit. I'm not quite as pissed off. I am as pissed off at the institution as ever, but I'm also trying to deal with that. And I realize, because we lost all connections, and at this point in life, that was totally like, whoa, nobody was caring how we survived. And so but the church isn't all bad. Let
me throw that.
Okay.
Maybe not. Okay. I don't know that yet. Ken, he can say that. That's not been my experience yet. Okay. It's pretty shit for me. So if you're listening,
okay. I need the institution to admit that it's not the church, because the minute we have a building or position or title, or we now have something to protect, and we're supposed to be protecting the image of God in people, and losing everything to do that. And so I believe that we need connection. And I believe if the local institutions could just admit, we aren't the church, but we want to provide opportunities for you to find church inside of our business, that would be a start for me at some place.
Amen. Amen.
And I hope they take your meeting. I hope it starts by not thinking that. I mean, Ken, you were a local church pastor. I can't imagine you could have your assistant do the same thing of like, don't answer any of their calls and don't let them get through to me. I'm sorry, what?
Right.
They're a member. Yeah. So I hope to see your vision come through, that they start taking some of our calls.
Yes.
Some of us that have been through things like this, that, like you said, it's cost you just about everything you had, socially, your house, you're the voices they should be listening to. Chelsea, you're a voice they should be listening to. And it starts with them taking your calls first, hopefully.
It does.
that posture, whatever that posture is, I hope they get that. That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Ken, you said this. I want to read this from this book, and it's funny because Teresa said, "Yeah, Ken has an essay in here," and we know, but we have it up because we wanted to read this for you.
What did I say?
But I want to read this quick. It says, "Everything filters through experience, whether we want to admit it or not. My experiences led me to affirm LGBTQ people. What are you afraid of? They are not hurting you. They are not hurting anyone. We are hurting them, and we need to stop." The bravery of leaving everything behind for both of you. I don't know that you guys will ever be able to fully understand the impact of what it was like as a queer person myself, and the dozens of queer friends I have when they sent the text message, "Did you see what the Garners did? Did you see that they left?" And I don't know that you guys will ever understand what that meant to our entire people group, to know that these people who had equity and stake, and they were somebody. You guys were somebody. You know, if you knew the Garners, like, you knew somebody. You were getting somewhere in the line of trying to talk to somebody. If you knew Pastor Ken and you knew Professor Teresa, and for you guys to walk away for us, we weren't worthy of that. But the bravery that took and what it meant to the community of people that are like me, and the community people like Brandon who walked away also for people like me, you guys are like heroes to us, genuinely, and to dozens and dozens of people that we know that felt like they were finally heard or seen because you walked away for them in honor of them.
Thanks. And I'd never really had the courage to ever do anything like that if it weren't for those queer people who came to our house and somehow trusted us enough to come out to us, knowing who we were and where we ministered. But their courage could not be denied, and when cornered, and it was like, nope. And I remember, again, humbling and humiliating. I remember way back when we would talk about gay people, because it's queer people aren't an issue; they're people, and they need to be experienced and lived with and talked to and heard and loved. And I remember when we would talk about it in hypothetical terms back in the 90s and early 2000s, and we would go through the question, well, what if one of our kids was gay? Would you go to their wedding? Teresa always said yes. And I was always probably more homophobic on it and said, but I what about the truth? What about hell and all that crap? So one of our fake friends was saying, "You mean fake hell?" It's like, well, you really want to talk, so but
have you read Rob Bell?
So
oh, he's dangerous. Be careful.
Care of that, but yeah, I'll go to Tanner's wedding. I in a heartbeat. I without a doubt, and we're supposed to change. We're supposed to be confronted with the truth. And when I went through that Wesleyan, and I walked my DS through the Wesleyan quadrilateral when he was in my face yelling at me for 2.5 hours. And I said, it's your Wesleyan quadrilateral that led me to believe this. And when I studied it and realized that. So please, if anybody's watching this and they haven't gone to 1946themovie.com and watched the movie, at least watch the movie if you're not willing to read with an open mind. And so watch the movie and hear. But I mean, the Bible doesn't even talk about homosexuality. And when I realized that I'm like, wait a minute. If that's the only that's the pillar left that I had to deal with, and then I'm like, well, what am I afraid of? And really, what are we afraid of? We're afraid that you're going to rub off on us, and that is, and you did. Your courage, your love for God, your authenticity, it all rubbed off. And in our group of people, the ones with the worst abuse to deal with were all ones that were brought up in the church and in Christian families. The ones that were not were doing so much better. We have hope now. We're dealing with our anger. We're trying to not let it rule our lives. But we're trying to not let the injustice fade either, so that we stay passionate about loving people.
And we started Love More, Less Fear because we realized most of our lives, the decisions we made were made out of fear. And we're done. We're done. We make our decisions out of love. That's who we believe Jesus is. And we've got to make our decisions out of love for the people around us. And I will say there are many people in our churches, many people in our churches all over the country who believe in an inclusive faith. And we are shocked at how many there are. And I want to say, I mean, there were people in our church there, in our church everywhere, that believe in the inclusivity of our God and in the love of our God. And I just pray that they are well, and that they can continue having an influence and a voice. But for us, I think it was time to move on and decide that we had tried and tried, but we're going to be okay as long as we have each other.
And people like you. I mean,
yes.
You are an oasis.
Yes.
For us. And you give us hope.
I was just about to say the same thing to you guys. Thank you for letting us experience Oasis with you guys. And and I feel like I would die to be able to be around that campfire where those queer individuals got to open up with two leaders that just listen to their stories. I'm wishing I could trade spiritual parents, but but
ask our kids.
I just love you guys. I just love you guys a lot, and thank you for spending some time with us and our audience today.
Thank you.
Teresa, you mentioned More Love, Less Fear. Would you tell people kind of where they can connect with you guys as we close?
Yes, lovemorelessfear.com is our website. And actually, you can go to lovemorelessfear.com, .net, .org. I think we got all of them because we wanted to make sure that
amazing.
We have not. We've got a lot of work to do there, but I just started a new job that hopefully will afford me a little more time to do more blogs. We do blogs, podcasts. We have quite a few of our history podcasts and blogs that people can access, but lovemorelessfear.com. So yeah, join us and just take a look around and leave us a comment. We'll get back to you.
Good.
We love you guys so much. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the way that you were such a light to us in the Nazarene Church when we were making our decision to leave. It was ministers and leaders like you that pulled us to stay. I can tell you that Brandon and I would have left way sooner had we not had leaders like you and pastors like you that we knew, affirmed who we were and affirmed our questions and were open to curiosity. And so just thank you for being everything that you are. And I'm really excited about, I've seen the website. Teresa, I've been talking with you ever since this transition kind of started. And so I'm really excited to find out more ways that we can support that. And another place for people like us and people that listen to this podcast where they can find another source of community. So I'm really excited about that.
Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for the way you're holding the torch up and lighting the way.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Religious Dropouts podcast. Take a moment to relax your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and take a deep inhale. As you exhale, focus on releasing any remaining tension in your physical body. We're so glad that you were here with us today for this conversation. We hope you were able to laugh, to unpack some of your past experiences and trauma, and that you were able to find some hope to look forward to the future. We'd love for you to connect with us on social media and at our new website, religiousdropouts.com. And as always, we would love for you to share this podcast with a friend or anyone you know who might need to understand how good it feels to be a dropout. You are so loved. Have a great week.